if you've gotten rid of the concerns of noise making, and it's a normal adornment, so it's not considered a burden, but still you're not allowed to go beyond your own personal private courtyard, because a bell on an animal seems to be indicative of the fact that you're going to go out to the market to sell it. So Rashi says we want to avoid giving that impression to people. So a bell, even if you've stopped it up, you can't go out in public with it, just keep it around in your own private chutzner. Okay, those are a bunch of different cases. Why did we bring this up in the end? This is a question on Shmuel. Shmuel said the food bag is not justified. There's going to be a tircha concern there. Because it doesn't provide enough of a benefit to the animal. But in that brisa we just said, Katani mihas, it says in that brisa, that a horse can't go out with a food bag into a Rishus Harabim. The Rishus Harabim hudalo. It can't go out in a Rishus Harabim, there's hotzah concerns there. It's going to be carrying a burden. But you can infer from that in its own, in the farmer's own private field, that's totally fine. There's no concerns about tircha in putting it on. So we say, my lad begidolim and mishum tanug. Are we not dealing there with the same case where we're dealing with grown-up horses, and that the only thing the food bag provides is a little bit of an enjoyment, a little bit of luxury, that it doesn't have to bend down to get the food? So we say, no, not a question on Shmuel. I can tell you the following: Bekatanim umishum sar. This brisa that allows, in theory, from a tircha perspective, putting on the food bag is for small animals. It's not because of tanug, rather it's because of tsar. Horses, younger horses, Rashi says, have longer legs and shorter necks. So for them to get food from the ground is much more difficult. There actually is pain involved for such animals. So the brisa that seems to allow it is for the smaller animals. But where Shmuel forbids it is for the larger animals, that it's not an element of tsar for them to get food from the ground. Rather, it's an element of just tanug. It's a little bit of a luxury. You don't have to bend down a little bit. Something that you're able to do.
We're talking about tircha for the person who's doing the activity. It's a tircha either way, whether the animal gets...
So something we mentioned earlier is that a tircha is going to be this balancing act. It's going to be how much work do I have to put in to do it, and also on the other end of the scale is how much of an essential benefit does it provide. So it seems like the act of attaching it to the animal is going to be the same either way, like you mentioned. But with regards to a younger animal, the worthwhileness of it, how much of a benefit it provides, it actually prevents tsar, that'll justify the amount of exertion I have to do. Whereas with regards to an older animal, where the only thing it provides a little bit of a luxury, so then even though I'm putting in the same amount of exertion as by the younger horse, since it's not as necessary for such a large horse, so therefore it's going to be forbidden. Right, tircha, you always have to keep in mind there's this balancing act.
Well, why are we concerned about the person's tircha? Here it's the hotzah of the animal, right?
So there's two separate elements. We talked about hotzah. Is this thing a burden? These things would be considered a burden, I think, the food bag. But we said, forgetting hotzah concerns, let's say the animal's for sure staying in my backyard all of Shabbos, it's fenced in. Am I allowed to put the food bag on from a tircha perspective?
On Shabbos.
On Shabbos. Right, so we seem to indicate from here that Shmuel thinks it's a problem, it's not justifiable enough, and Rav thought it was okay. Okay, Dikanami, you could infer this also to Katani. It says Dumya de Kameya. In that brisa that we just quoted, where it allowed you to, it seems to at least implicitly allow you to put the food bag on the horse. If there's no hotzah concerns, that's similar to an amulet. Earlier we said that an amulet is going to be a problem of hotzah alone, but not a problem of tircha. So Shema Mina, yes, you can learn that from here also, from this brisa, based on the fact that it grouped kameya together with the case of a food bag. That shows that it's the same concerns, that it's it's going to be a concern of hotzah only, and not a concern of tircha to put it on. Okay. Amar Amar. Now the master said in the brisa that we just quoted, V'lo b'kameya afal pi shehu mumcha. The animal is not allowed to go out in a Rishus Harabim wearing this amulet, even if the amulet is... I'm going to assume there are different ways of explaining this Gemara, but let's assume that we're talking about the amulet being, proven. Not that the author of the amulet has been proven as an expert amulet writer, but that the amulet itself is effective. So now we say v'ha'anan tanan, but we learned in a Mishnah the following: V'lo b'kameya she'ena mumcha. A person is not allowed to go out into a Rishus Harabim with an amulet that is not proven. Ha mumcha shapir dami. That would imply that if it's a proven amulet, that a person is allowed to go out. So you're thinking, I'm sure, the obvious question. Earlier on, we already discussed how animals are going to be more stringent than people with regards to this. We'll answer that shortly. But right now, the Gemara assumes Why should there be a different standard? If a person's allowed to go out with a proven amulet, why is an animal not allowed to? So the Gemara answers, Hachinami she'eno mumcha. No, okay, fine. In the case of the animal also, you're dealing with an animal going out with an amulet that is not proven, and that's why I can't go out on the Rishus Harabim with it. But if it was an expert, a proven amulet, then it would be okay. Now the Gemara says the obvious question to that. But the Gemara, that brisa we just quoted, it says that an animal can't go out with it, afal pi shehu mumcha, even though the amulet was proven. Katani. That's what's written in the brisa explicitly. So how can you claim that we're dealing with an amulet that was not proven? So we say, Mumcha la'adam ve'inu mumcha la'behema. You're dealing with an amulet that has been proven to provide help to people, but not to animals. So the Gemara says, Mi'ika mumcha la'adam ve'lo havi mumcha la'behema. Do you have such a thing? You have an amulet that works for people and not for animals? So the Gemara says, yeah, you have such a thing. Adam de'isle mazla. People, they have a mazel. Rashi understands that to mean people have malachim up above that are interceding for us, and apparently that, together with a kameah, together with an amulet, misayeh will provide a person with assistance. Behema delis la mazla lo misayeh. However, an animal that does not have such angels doesn't have the other key ingredient here, so a kameah will not provide it with the same degree of protection, and therefore you need, in order for an amulet to work for an animal, it has to be proven to work for animals. There are other explanations of this Gemara. There's a Meiri that seems to understand that Kameya is basically a placebo effect. And he understands the term mazel to be that a person has a mind, and therefore if you put a Kameya on him, he's going to think, oh, this works, and therefore it's going to provide that placebo effect. Whereas an animal, you put this thing on it, it has no idea what the heck you're doing. So that's not going to be providing anything. But okay, there's a number of different approaches to this Gemara. Some perhaps more attuned to our rational minds than others. But I'm just telling you what Rashi says. Okay. Now the Gemara says, Ihaki, but if that's the case, how do you understand the other part of this brisa that we quoted, that it says that we're going to treat animals more stringently than humans with regards to an amulet? Right now it sounds like our conclusion is it's the same. The only thing you have to keep in mind is a practical consideration that what works for people doesn't necessarily work for animals. So we say, Misara Dakameaka, you think that a statement in the Brisa that it says that there are more stringencies for animals than people is referring to the amulet? Asan Dalkai, no, it's talking about the shoe case. The Brisa said that animals shouldn't go out with shoes lest they fall off and a person will carry it for Amos. So with people you don't have such a concern. A person's wearing a shoe and it falls off in the Rosh Hashanah, he'll put it back on, he's wearing it again and he can walk out, no problem. Okay, now we have a number of questions on the statement that both Shmuel and Rav agreed on earlier. Shmuel and Rav both agreed earlier that tsar is to prevent pain on an animal. It is justified from a tircha perspective to prevent that by putting various things on the animal. So now we're using a weird language to introduce this case. We're saying Tashma, come in here, a proof. Sounds like we're not challenging anyone, but actually these cases that we're about to bring up are going to challenge Rav and Shmuel's assumption that you're allowed to, let's say, put a warming cloth on an animal, perhaps even a saddle, to remove tsar from an animal. So Tashma, come in here, proof. A person is allowed to anoint himself and also scrape off a scab. But on Shabbos, an animal is for an animal you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to anoint it with oil or scrape off a scab. So now, end quote. Now we're going to analyze. Is this not talking about a case where we're dealing with a scab that causes pain, and therefore you say, look, here's an animal that it's having pain, and we're not allowing you to do something for it. So we say, lo, not necessarily. I can tell you that case is a situation where the animal has a wound, which is actually fully healed already. It's not causing any pain by its presence, but to scrape it off, it provides a little bit more of a luxury. Sometimes our scabs aren't bothering us at all, but we feel like we want to look a little nicer to take it off, something like that. So that's what's forbidden on Shabbos for the animal. But yeah, if the animal was experiencing tsar, we would allow such an act of removal. Okay, Tashma here, another proof. This is going to be a question on Rav and Shmuel's assumption that tsar will justify certain degrees of tircha. We have behema she'achza dam. You have an animal that is. I looked around. Nobody really explains what this means. They say blood congestion. It's some kind of illness. An animal that has this blood congestion, whatever it is. You cannot place it in water so that it will cool off. Apparently cooling off this animal would get rid of this condition. So you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos, despite the fact apparently that it's experiencing tsar. Adam she'achzu dam, but a human being that has this blood congestion, that person can go in cold water in order to cool off and then thereby be cured somewhat. So again, you have a brisa that seems to indicate tsar will not be enough of a consideration to justify tircha to help out an animal. Amar Ula. Ula responds to that, not a challenge. Gezerah mishum shechika samamanim. This is different. In other cases where I'm removing tsar, I'm just putting something warm on it. There's no like medicinal properties to what I'm doing. Whereas here, putting the animal in the cold water is close enough to medicinal treatment, and therefore we're going to make a gezerah. We're going to prohibit that, lest somebody come in there and being so caught up in trying to cure this illness that they're going to come and grind up herbs for medicinal purposes. That would be an Isser D'Oraisa of Tochin. We have that with ourselves as well. We're not allowed to take medicine sometimes on Shabbos. Illness and certainly threats to life justify taking medicines on Shabbos. This gezerah only applies to us and perhaps animals as well when you're dealing with some kind of illness that is not debilitating. It doesn't make a person bedridden. You have a slight headache, we would say within this gezerah perhaps you shouldn't take aspirin. But if a person's like bedridden for whatever illness they have, or if chas v'shalom their life is in danger, then for sure all of these things fall out the window. You can give them medicine. You can do whatever medical treatment necessary. But in any event, what we're saying right now is this case is different. It's true. There's tsar in an animal. He's got this blood disease, and we're not allowing you to cure him. But it's not because tsar in general is not is not a justifiable reason to provide an animal with healing. Rather, here there's a specific kind of medicinal healing going on, and we're worried that that's too close to grinding up herbs. Therefore, we're going to forbid it. But then the follow-up question is, if that's the case, then for people also shouldn't be allowed to go into cold water to cool themselves off and heal them from this blood congestion thing. So we say, no, Adam Nira can make a person, if he goes into cold water, he looks like he's just cooling himself off, not for medicinal purposes. This gezerah, it's important to know, the gezerah of shechika samamanim, we're worried that you're going to grind up herbs. That is only of concern if the behavior you're engaging in is one that is very clearly to everybody else that's looking for medicinal purposes. If a person, let's say, for example, has a sore throat, they can drink tea with honey in it, because that's something that normal people do even if they're not feeling bad. So the same thing here. A person can go into cold water because even if a person is not feeling sick at all, that might be something that they would conceivably do. The Gemara's follow-up question is, so let the animal go in the water too. It'll also look like it's cooling off. What's the big deal? So you say, Ein Meikar La Behema. Animals, you don't put animals into a swimming pool typically to cool off. That's strange. And therefore, anybody that sees you doing this will know for sure that you're doing it for healing purposes, and therefore it's forbidden. Okay. Now we ask a follow-up question that gets to the root of this even. Do you even have such a gezerah for animals that we're not going to allow you to heal them lest you come to grind up, in the heat of the moment, grind up herbs for it to cure it? So by people, it's taken for granted that gezerah exists. Because we get very caught up in trying to cure ourselves of certain things, so one thing could lead to the other. But if my animal's not feeling well, am I really going to be so caught up in caring about my animal that I'm going to come and grind up herbs for it? So we're saying maybe there shouldn't be such a gezerah by animals at all. And I'll give you a proof for it. V'hatanya, we learned in a brisa. Let's say you have an animal that is standing outside the Shabbos boundaries, that I'm not allowed to go beyond there to get the animal. I can call it, and it'll come over. And we're not worried. We're not going to make a gezerah that maybe you will come to actually yourself go outside the tchum to bring it back forth. So you see from this case, that when you're dealing with animals, we're not as concerned that you're going to get so caught up in the moment and go violate an isser. So how can you claim that at the same time we are going to be worried about you getting caught up in healing your animal and grinding up herbs for it? So Amar Ravina says, to translate this literally in the Gemara, it means, for example, where your techum, your personal boundary, is absorbed within the animal's boundary is absorbed within your boundary. Rashi says outside what this means, and it doesn't read in perfectly well. Others are going to ask questions on him. But he says that the case is as follows. Generally, my animal is bound to the same boundaries as myself coming into Shabbos. I have to make sure my animal doesn't go beyond those boundaries also. The only time an animal has different boundaries than myself is if I put it in the care of some kind of watchman, some kind of guard, before Shabbos began. Then the tzechum, the boundaries of the animal, is the responsibility of the watchman, and it'll be the boundaries based on where the watchman is as Shabbos arrives. So we're talking about a case, Rashi says, where in my tchum, I'm totally within my tchum, I'm not at risk of going outside my own boundary, but I see that my animal is wandering somewhere. He's wandering in an area that if I bring him home, he's going to go outside of the boundary of the watchman, whose responsibility it is. So in this case, you're allowed to call it over. To indirectly do it in that manner is permitted. You're not viewed as responsible for the boundary requirement of the watchman, but you can't actively pull the animal beyond the tchum, beyond the boundary of the animal watchman. Ultimately, what you have from this answer of the Gemara is we're dealing with a very different concern by nature. We're dealing with something which we're going to allow you to do. We just would prefer that you don't do it directly. Whereas in the other cases, we're worried about a person actually coming to violate a prohibition explicitly with their own hands themselves. It's a little bit unclear, especially in terms of how to read this case of Rashi into the words. But essentially, what the answer amounts to is the case of the Tchumen. We're not going to make a decree that you're going to get caught up in yourself and violate an Isser. It's because the nature of the Isser is very different. And therefore, we're not going to view it as a proof. And in general, we will right now assume that we are not worried in most cases. Sorry, that we are worried in most cases that you're going to get caught up and you're going to either grind up herbs or do some other Isser to help out your animal. Okay, we're on the first wide line. Back inside, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, "Shchika samamanim gufa tanahi." Invoking this decree of grinding up herbs and the like for animals, for healing animals, that itself is a machlokas tanaim. Some tanaim would tell you that you don't have to be worried about giving any medicinal treatment to your animals, and that it would spiral into violating Yisuri Da'araisa. Some say it's totally fine. The Tanya, for we learned in the Braisa, behema sha'achla karshinin, an animal that eats too much vichia plant. It's a kind of legume. It's not so good for it apparently. Lo yiritzena b'chatzer. You're not allowed to let your animal run around the field b'shil shetisrape in order that it should be healed. What that did, Rashi says, it allows the bowels to move and expel that plant before it could do too much damage. So you're not allowed to do that, according to the Tanakama, because of Gezerah Samamanim. We're worried that if we allow you to do that method of healing, it could come to eventually grinding up medicines. Rabbi Yoshaya Matir, however, Rabbi Yoshaya says that that's totally fine. He doesn't think that we have this gezerah by animals, that we're worried that one kind of healing will spiral into doing Isurei Da'araisa for the purposes of healing. Okay. Darish Rava said, Halakha Rabbi Yoshaya. He expounded that the law follows Rabbi Yoshaya, and therefore we don't have a concern of Shechika Samamanim. We're not worried you're going to do an Isurei Da'araisa to provide medicine for your animals on Shabbos. We do have it for people, however. Okay. How much time do I have? Not so much more time. Amar Mar says, yeah, we can go till we finish off. No one's in a time here. Well, feel free to walk out on me though. Amar Mar, the master said, in this brisa we quoted at the end of the previous Amud, we said, Lo yatsa hazav b'kis shalo, a zav who experiences a gonorrheal emission, he can't walk out with his bag attached. V'lo izim b'kis shebedadein, and goats can't go out with the pouch on their udders. So focusing on that last item of the brisa, v'hatanya, but we learned in the brisa, yotzos izim b'kis shebedadein, that goats are allowed to go out with this thing tied to their udders. Amar Rav Yehuda. You have Rabbi Yehuda as opposed to Rebbe Yehuda. We're going to have two Yehudas in a second, so keep in mind who's the Rab, who's the Rebbe. I'm a Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo kasha, it's not a question. Hadam mehadik, hadam lo mehadik. The case that we're allowed to do it is where it's tied on, it's fastened securely, and therefore we're not concerned that it's going to fall off and you're going to come and carry it for amos. And apparently it's viewed as a functional enough accessory that it's not in the first place considered a burden with hotzah concerns. And the other case is where it's not fastened securely. You're not allowed to go out. Even though there's no hotzah concerns, there are concerns that it'll fall off and then the human will grab it and do hotzah with it. Okay, Rav Yosef says, Tanai shakalta me'alma. In response to Rav Yehuda, Rav Yosef says, what, all the Tanaim left the world for you? Tanai, you don't have to, jump over hoops to try to resolve the contradiction here. It's a machlokas Tanaim. We can say that, it's fine. The Tanan, for we learned in a Mishnah, this is our Mishnah that we're building off of at the beginning of the class, Ha'izim yotzos tsaruros. Goats are allowed to go out if they are tied. Apparently talking about the same thing. That's the Tanakama. Rabbi Yossi, not Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yossi oser b'chulan chutz min arachilos hakavunos. Rabbi Yossi, he forbids all of these various things that we've talked about in the Mishnah, except for sheep going out kavunos. Again, we'll talk about that tomorrow. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda, however, says, Rabbi Yehuda the Tana, as opposed to Rabbi Yehuda earlier. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, izim yotzas struos liyavesh avalo lechalev. That goats are allowed to go out with these pouches tied to them if it's for the purposes of drying them up, to stop them from lactating and being able to conceive children. However, you can't tie a pouch to them in order to catch their milk. So you can simply say it's machlokas tanaim. The brisa that says that you're not allowed to tie the pouch on is Rabbi Yossi Shita, who doesn't allow it. The brisa that says you're allowed to tie the pouch could be the Tanna Kama that says you are allowed to do it. Alternatively, I could tell you, Rabbi Yehuda. Both are according to Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, that third opinion. V'lo kashya, and there's no contradiction. Kan liyavish, kan licholiv. The brisa that says it's permitted is talking about when you tied the pouch on to dry the goat up. And the brisa that says you're not allowed to do it is for when you're doing it to catch all the milk of the goat. And so ultimately, we'll conclude that you can make this. You don't have to resolve these two brisos together by trying to say they're talking about different things necessarily. It could be a machlokas tanam, or it could be just the two different parameters of Rabbi Yehuda's psak. Okay, Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Amar Rav Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, Maisa be'izim beis Antuchia, there were the goats of the house of Antuchia, Shayu dadein gasin. They had very large udders. Va'asu lehen kisin kadesh lo yisrutu dadein. So now we're talking about there is a third possibility of why a person would cover their goats' udders. They put these pouches on the udders so that they would not be scraped. That the udders wouldn't be scraped while they were walking. Apparently they were so large that they could get dragged on the ground and cause some pain to the animal. So apparently if you were to have such a kind of goats, it would be permitted. That would be a very functional, necessary accessory. And you would probably want to make sure that you tie it tightly enough that it won't fall off. Okay. If you thought that was strange, we have a much stranger Gemara coming up. We learned in a brisa. We have a person. There was a person whose wife passed away. V'hanicha ben leonik, and she left him a son that needed to be nursed. It was a young child. The guy was poor. He didn't have enough money to hire a wet nurse. So a miracle happened for him. His breasts developed, like two of a woman. And then he was able to nurse his son. What a miracle. Amazing. I'm not sure if he was so happy about this, but it helped him nurse his child. Now, Rav Yosef said, what a great guy this must have been. Look, that's a pretty amazing miracle. Abaye said, Adarab, this is a very important theological statement right now that we're going to have from Abaye. The opposite. How coarse this man must have been. That God, in order to help this guy out, he had to cause a change in nature to make it happen. Men don't grow these things, and if they do, that apparently is only something that he would do for somebody who is not as worthy of perhaps a greater method of service. What would that greater way of helping him out be?
Give him money.
Get him a job, give him money, right? So he said that had to happen. That shows this guy was not so worthy. Rav Yehuda says, Bo rei kama kashim zonosav shel adam. Come and see that how hard it is for God to. So theologically, also this is difficult. What does it mean that something is harder for God than something else? But okay, let's keep that question in our pocket for now. Rabbi Yehuda says, you see how hard it is for God to provide sustenance for people. That in this story, what did God see it as easier to do, at least according to Abaye? Easier to give this guy the ability to provide milk for his child than to give the guy money. Rav Nachman says, Tida de Misrachish Nisa. Know this also from the fact that when Nisim happen, they happen for other things. Below Avru Mizone, but you very rarely see miracles happen of a nature by which food is just created from them. So you see that it's, so to speak, hard in some way or another for God to provide sustenance for people, and therefore other methods are viewed as easier. I'm not entirely sure what that means. That'll be for an Ian Shir perhaps one day. Not Daf Yomi. Tanur Rabbanan. You have another brisa, another interesting story. There was a man who married a woman who was without a hand. He did not know that she didn't have a hand until the day she died. Okay. Amarav, come and see how incredibly modest this woman must have been. The husband never noticed that she didn't have a hand. We shouldn't shy away from these statements in the Gemara. There is it depends on what culture you're living in. What's normal, what's considered very strange and not worth the value of tznius in which is practiced. But apparently, there is a milah if you can get away with it. If it's considered normal enough in the society in which you live, and the other considerations don't overpower this, there is a notion of tznius of even apparently covering up her hand. That's what Rav seems to say. In our world, I would tell you don't do that. That would be going overboard.
But you never tried to give her a hand or anything.
So we're going to say right now, Amar lo Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia said, that's the way of a woman. And Rashi says that women are tsanua by nature, and that's at least something that they have as a value in general. And he says, certainly this woman, That's something that you want to cover up. You don't want people to know about that, the fact that you're missing a hand. So, it's not so amazing on her account. Ela kama tsanua adam zeh. How tsanua was this man? Shalo hikir be'isho. He never looked at his wife in that way, that he even noticed that she was missing a hand. Again, I don't know what to tell you. It's there's apparently there's a degree of there's a derech. We have a couple of drachim in the words of Chazal that would seem to indicate be a part of this world and use your desires to fuel your service of Hashem. And there is another way of looking at things that this Gemara would seem to be taking, that no, to deny the physical nature of the world as much as possible would be preferred, and that's the perspective that this Gemara is taking.
I think it was a news anchor woman. My wife told me. Right in the place, she didn't have one hand, so you never showed it on the television.
Makes sense. That'd be pretty distracting for viewers, I imagine. I imagine that would be very distracting for viewers. It makes sense to hide it.
She was like very famous.
Okay. So that's the Gemara. Okay.
I thought she wasn't friendly because she never wins.
Okay. More on. Now we're going to reflect on the various terms that we talked about in the Mishnah. I'll try to finish quickly. Okay. Zacharim yotzin levuvin. Rams are allowed to go out. There's no hotzah concerns if they go out levuvin. My levuvin, the Gemara asks, what exactly does this term mean? Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says, tu teri. You're dealing with animals that are tied in pairs. Two rams can go attached to each other. Apparently that was restraining and helped them from running away. To attach them to each other, and that whatever that attaching device was, that was not a problem of chutzah. That was viewed as a necessary functional item to them, and therefore not a burden. My mashma, how exactly is the word levuvin implying this notion of an attaching device? The high levuvin lishna de kruvehu. How do I know that it's a language that indicates connection? Dichsiv, for the pasuk says, this is a pasuk in Shir Hashirim, libavtini achosi chala. So you have captured my heart. Again, my sister, my bride. These are allusions to the Jewish people. But that word levavtani, that you have literally, you've hearted me. You've gotten my heart. That shows a certain degree of connection. And levuvin will be apparently etymologically connected to that word. Okay. Ula gives a different suggestion of what levuvin is. He says, "Orshek shurun lahem keneged libam." It is a patch of leather that you tie to the chest, to the heart area of a ram. Kadesh lo yiplu aleim ze'evin, so that a wolf that is attacking the ram will not be able to get to, I guess, that functional, that crucial organ of the ram, and hopefully it'll more easily survive that encounter. So now the Gemara says, "Ze'evim achzarim nafle." Ze'evim azacharim nafle. What? Wolves attack just male rams, and the kevas lo nafle, but they don't go on the females, right? The Mishnah seems to indicate you're only allowed to put this on the male ram, not on the female sheep. So what's the difference? Sounds like something I would want to put on all my animals. So you say Mishum Damasku Bereish Edra. It's because the rams lead the flock, and therefore they're the ones at the front, and the wolves will attack them first. So now the Gemara says, even Bereish Edra Nafli, Besof Edra Lo Nafli. Is that true? Wolves only attack the front. They don't terrorize from the back, so that's not true necessarily. Rather, it's because rams are fattier, they're, I guess, looking tastier to a wolf than a female, and therefore you would want to provide that protection to a male. Will be more likely to need it than a female. But does a wolf really know the difference between one and the other? It'll probably go for eating both. You don't know how fatty really something is until you take a bite into it, I guess. So how would this wolf know the difference between a male and a female? So rather it's because the males, the rams, they very often walk upright, and they have their nose pointed up, and they walk and they look everywhere, and therefore Rashi says they make eye contact with the wolves. They're viewed as more of a challenging creature, and the wolf's going to start up with the ram before it starts up with the female sheep. Therefore, it's viewed as a ram is viewed as more worthy of protection of this levuvin rather than the females, and therefore it's going to be considered a non-burden, a functional item for the ram, but not for the sheep. That is the opinion of, who is this again? Rav Yossi, I think. This was Rav Yossi. Okay.
With your nose up.
Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says a third approach. Orsha koshren lahen tachas zechorasan. It is a piece of leather which is attached to their organ, their genital area. Kedish lo yalu ala nekevos, so that they should not breed. They shouldn't go on top of the female sheep. You want to prevent the sheep from procreating, so you would put that on the ram. Mimai. So where does that come from? Where do you get the where do you get this idea from that it means that? Midakatani Seifa, because the later part of the Mishnah says, "V'harechelim yotzos shechuzos." that female sheep are also allowed to go out with shechuzos. And my shechuzos, what is that shechuzos term? She'uchsin ha'alya shalahen, that this device apparently grabs the tail of the sheep, lamala, and it grabs it up, kadesh yalu alein zecharim, so that the female's genital area should be exposed, and therefore the males would be able to mount the female and create children. So reisha kadesh lo yalu ala nekevos. If at the beginning we're talking about, it makes sense to say we're talking about a device that prevents procreation of going on the females. But seifa kadesh yalu alein, and then for the she'aleu zecharim, that the seifa, the last part of the Mishnah, is talking about a device that will promote procreation. I would understand if you're putting these two items next to each other in the Mishnah, they're probably talking about the same issue of these animals having procreation. So my mashma dahai shechuzos lishna de giloihu. How do you know that this word of shechuzos implies revealing the genital area of the female? For it's written v'hinei isha likraso. There is a woman, that is a pasuk in Mishlei. A woman is coming to greet him. Shis zona u'netzuras leiv. She exposed. This woman is exposed like a prostitute, and she's plotting in her heart to do bad things. But in any event, the words shis zona, it is a contraction. The shechuzos is a contraction of those two words. Exposed like a harlot. So this device that you use to keep the sheep's tail up and expose her to the male ram, it has its etymology from that pasuk. Okay, Yashar Koach.